Hello, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk About It. We're here to investigate incest and destigmatize childhood crimes. Many people don't want to talk about it. We do. Tonight, I have a special panel. I haven't done this before. These are our previous guests. And one of the things that we've noticed is there's this theme that comes up about the accomplices in our lives and who our mothers were, and if they had been different. We're not here to blame or place blame, but we're here to chat about not who our mothers were, but what it felt like to be children of them and what we needed, kind of to bring some advantageous points to people out there that are listening and how to be good parents coming through this. And again, just to destigmatize it. People often have that question about, why didn't you tell, all of these things. The more we talk about it, I heard the other day someone say to me, this is so validating what you're doing. And so anyway, our panelists are here tonight for that very purpose. I'm going to do something different, and they do a lot of work and advocacy work. And so I'm going to let each one of the panelists introduce themselves tonight. And first, we're going to start with Carol Boyce. Carol, if you could go ahead and introduce yourself, that would be awesome. And then you can pass it to Joann.
Okay, thank you. Jody, first, I want to just applaud your efforts. You're just amazing. And I hope all your listeners listen to the previous recordings you've made and podcasts, because it's just so important to have this voice out there. And Jody is just amazing in being able to do this. I am a survivor. First, I had no memory of what was wrong. I had tremendous post-traumatic stress from something that I had no idea what had happened. And I got memories when I was about 36, when my daughter was the age when this was happening to me, which was about 3 or 4. And I have gone through a huge amount of effort trying to recover. I was recovering when nothing was written about this. So I wrote a book about my story and what happened. And I call it First, I Believe You. And it is hopefully a roadmap for other survivors to understand what the disease is that they have, the disorder, and how to find recovery and joy from it. So anyway,
that's awesome. And by the way, I can put a plug in for that book. I've read it, and she does a fantastic job. She shares her story, but she really talks about what it looks like, because often, especially in Christian circles, I see people like, oh, I'm all good, Jesus healed me. I'm like, well, how the heck did you get there? So right. I really like stories about what it looks like to get there. So thank you so much for that book. It's an awesome book. I've read it and I really enjoyed it. I would encourage anybody to get it. Tell me the name again one more time.
It's called First, I Believe You, and it's on Amazon.
Which I absolutely love. And your name?
Yes, Carol Boyce.
Boyce.
Yes. And I really hope it helps you or your loved ones understand better traumatic recovery and traumatic amnesia. So
yes, which you did a very nice job talking about traumatic amnesia, which I haven't met very many survivors that stay completely in their story, so I think it's really, you do a really good job diving into that. The man that was hidden, that you didn't know who was, it's like you were having a haunting, but it's all this PTSD flashbacks and that sort of thing. Very nice job on that book.
Thank you so much. And then pass the torch on to Joann and hear about what she's been working on.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Jody, for giving us the opportunity to share our stories and all of us unite in this huge battle that we are all facing. And so my name is Joeann Crafton. I grew up and am the victim of childhood sexual abuse. And it continued on for a long, long time. And I actually, God told me to write my book. And so I wrote a book, and of course it's called Taking a Different Path, Finding Joy in the Journey. And I had to write it under a pen name. The pen name is Sophia James. And then I went and followed through with a workbook and a journal, because I believe heavily in journaling to get these things out. We have to have a place to put them so they're not rattling around inside of our mind, our hearts, our spirits, our souls, or whatever we, and taunting us and haunting us and torturing us. And I think it's important that we share our stories so that other people can say, me too.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, 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 yes. That's awesome. And again, I can make a plug for Joann's book. I've read it. It was very well written. She's very honest and authentic about her trek through life, which again is important for everybody listening. I saw comments on some of these, and they always say, I can see that your lives are healing. I don't think it's ever, I think it's a destination. I mean, it's not a destination, it's a journey, right? And so anyway, she also does a very good job of taking you through the years of all of that. And by the way, we're all still healing. I want to put that in there because, it's it's just part of life. And coming together has been really cool, coming together as sisters and just that thing. So we're here tonight to talk about our moms. When we all came together and began to do this, it was very clear that mothers in these households played a role, even if it was a silent role. It was a role that was so loud that it changed the very destiny of our lives. And so we wanted to come together and just really talk about what that felt like. And again, I want to say that we're not here to bash our mothers or actually even tell you who they were, because we can't know who they were, really. We can only know what it felt like to be their child. And so with that, I want you guys to be free to bring questions as well. I want us to start with a little bit what it felt like to be the child of our mothers. I know that most of my memories of my mom were always viewing her from a distance somewhere. We were kind of disconnected. My mother was also an abuser in the house. And so she was not only just turned the other way, she actually entered the rooms, not all the time, very seldom, but she still did. And when that happens, you have nobody left, right? And so when your mother turns this blind eye to what's happening to you, whether she's in that room or not, it's suffocating. So if you guys could talk a little bit about that suffocation. I know you guys both know what that feels like, because if we had protection, we wouldn't be sitting together tonight, right? So, whoever wants to take that, just go ahead and let's just authentically talk about what that suffocation feels like when your mom looks the other way, or bring me into wherever you want to in the story.
I can speak to my experience. My mother was what I would call a raging alcoholic. She was angry all the time. Particularly when my father walked in the door, it was like a battlefield. And they were quickly, they were drinking a lot. And I think what I took from that was that I just didn't matter. My feelings, your parents are supposed to be that loving, nurturing, particularly your mother. We think of nurturing and that bond, and somebody that, like you said, keeps you safe and listens to you. And I don't think any of us had any of that. I know I certainly didn't. And I loved my mother. It was a very, it's a very complex thing when you have abuse going in the house. And I was being molested by my father, who was a heart specialist internist. But I believe my mother's role was, she was so angry at my father, and he was just this passive, kind person. And I believe he then took that out on me. I think he took out all his anger and rage out on me. And my mother was just not sober enough to even know what was going on.
So daily alcoholism took her out of the equation.
Right. And I appreciate it. I know it's very easy to fall in that. She had a lot to sedate, in her life. And I certainly forgive her for that. but yeah, I think it's just this statement that her emotions mattered, her anger mattered, but nobody else in the family had that, you know, were able to express any anger, you know, so.
Right. And so in my case, it was my father as well, my brother, my mother. In Joann's case, it was not in your home, right, Joann? So go ahead and bring us a little bit into your relationship with your mom.
The people that victimized me were outside of the house, and I'm very grateful for that. With the amount of rage that I had over that abuse, to have it have been in my home, it would have been 1,000 times worse. My mother had her little bubble, and people existed in that little bubble if you did as she said to do, and if you pleased her. And I don't ever remember being in that bubble. As a matter of fact, I remember feeling like it was my siblings and my mother, and but not my dad. My dad, I'm not sure. My dad was an angry person as well, and he was. I mean, so my dad abused me and my mom abused me, but it was not sexual abuse. I mean, to me, there's absolute sexual abuse, physical abuse, mental, emotional, psychological, pathological, all those different types. And so I was abused by my father, mentally, emotionally. He screamed, yelled, raged, had a terrible temper. And mother, I think that she was more bipolar. And when I look back, and I mentioned the bubbles, and this is how I guess I internalized it. I was never in her bubble. And my mother, her abuse was neglect. It was not being available, not listening. And I think that I was clearly um, um, acting out, and that should have brought notification to her that I was in distress, and it never did. And, looking back, realizing that my mother and my grandmother both have manic or bipolar depression. And so I don't know that they were able to care for anyone else. And, as you, Carol, have mentioned, that I've forgiven my mother, because I realized that, even us, we've done the best that we could for where we were. It doesn't negate or excuse what happened, but for our own sanity, you could say that we just need to let that go. And, again, nothing negates it or changes what happened to us. We were abused, we were neglected, we were abandoned. And it's funny, but well, no, it's not funny. It's really sad. But anyway, I never had physical touch from my parents.
Yeah.
And I have a lady in church, huh?
No, I think that's a very interesting observation. I had very little.
Yeah. And so I struggle with people because of the bubble analogy. I struggle with people being in my bubble. I'm not used to physical emotion, hugs, affection. I'm not used to that. And I have really struggled with that. And I have a lady at church who is purpose. I don't know. She just seeking me out. And I think God's using her. But I am able to, okay, you guys know Pepe Le Pew?
Yeah,
Of course.
Right? Okay, when people hug me, I look and feel on the inside like Pepe Le Pew. I'm like, get me out of here. I
Right. It's not my favorite thing either.
it's so hard. And so, but Chris, my friend, seeks me out all the time, and she just rests in my hugs, and I am able to rest in her hugs. And it's kind of beautiful, because I'm starting to realize that I actually do like hugs, and that I want them, and that I like to give them. And so, like you said, we're all still healing. This thing is a journey, man. There is no doubt. I think the destination is when we all go to meet our maker.
That's
And
right.
so, seriously, but I did not get physical affection from my mother. And my father was very reluctant to give it as well. And so, but again, I've forgiven her, which was the hardest thing to do. The
Right.
hardest thing to do was to
And
forgive
you
my mother.
know, just for the people listening, before we started this panel discussion, I chose the ladies who are on here because I know that we've all really walked in forgiveness towards our mother. It does no good to hold on to it, and none of us are of that belief that we want to hold on to these things. But we are here to dissect it because, number one, it validates people listening who may not understand what that feels like. And one of the things I want to talk
Absolutely.
about is I remember the subtle messages that my mom gave me without a word, that she would say to me very clearly, I don't come to me with your pain. Can you guys talk about that at all? My mom would she never said to me, don't come with my pain, but through her ignoring, I heard somebody say ignoring in this conversation. And what there was a lot of, I was like a ghost to her. And if I
Yeah.
did get her attention, she didn't like giving me that attention. So I was a ghost. And so, you know, the implied thing through that is don't talk, don't speak, don't see, just go
Mhm.
away. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. Yeah. And I think, I think we have to look at their role in the system of the family. These are complex systems in any
Mhm.
family. And like you talk of mental health issues, my mother had your mother, all of them did. They were not capable of taking care of anybody. They couldn't take care of their own mental health. And,
Right. Very true.
and I think that's what allows the abuse too, for father or outside of the family, because they're not in tune with their children. And the children get a very clear message, as I did: don't ever bring up what's bothering me. I don't think it ever even crossed my mind that an adult would
Right.
come to help me. Yeah. Did you have
See,
that, Jody?
yeah, and and Joanne, I want you to talk about this next too, but what you just said is it does not cross our mind. And I'm not
Mine.
saying this for the person listening, and I'm saying it for the person who lived the abuse. It did not cross our minds. And I think
Yeah.
that that's something, talk about destigmatizing. It is so true, because the reason that we talk about these things is our home environment did not cultivate us to go to anybody with any problems. If there was a problem in our culture, in the families that we came from, we were the problem. So you weren't going to talk to anybody because you were the problem,
I
right,
was the
Joanne?
problem.
Right. So
I was
Joanne,
the problem.
talk about that a little bit.
Well, I had a different situation. Of course, my offenders, being male and outside of the family, told me that if I told, they were going to kill my family members, or that's what one said. The other one said that I'm an adult. The other adults will believe me, not you.
Mm-hmm.
So who
Which
could I
could have
talk
been
to?
true. Yeah.
Who
Right.
could I talk to?
Well, see,
They're
the other
adults. They're
right. The other thing is, though, is if you had a mother that cultivated communication, cultivated protection with you, cultivated
Mhm.
this environment that said, Joanne, I care and I'm listening, you would have told. I actually know people that that's happened and the child has come and talked. But it's
Mhm.
also a different culture. It's a culture that says children matter. It's a
Yeah.
culture that says, come talk to me. I mean, right, Joanne? Because when
yes.
did you go to your mom and talk to her? Because see, that wasn't cultivated.
See,
You really protected yourself in your life,
yeah.
I think.
Well, I reported. So the two people that molested me were family friends. The person I reported was a family member, and I went at the age of 11 to my mom and told her what this person was doing. I didn't mention that it was me, because my main goal at that time, being the oldest child of that lineage, so I'm the
Mhm.
oldest of the grandchildren, and I was protecting the younger grandchildren from
Mm.
and so my mom literally put me in the car, took me to my grandmother's
Mhm.
house, told grandma what I said. Grandma said it's being handled. And then mom took me home. Well, a year later, my cousin is telling me that they're going to commit suicide. And I'm like, this can't be. I did everything I could. And
Oh,
so in the
wow.
back of my mind, I went back to our early school days where it said, you can go to the police. And I marched my happy butt all the way from my house down to the
I
chemist
love that
station.
story. That's so
Huh?
awesome. I love that
I'm
story.
serious. I fell twice on the way down there. My cousin and my aunt, well, another cousin and aunt went with me, and they're like, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And I'm like, "I have to do this. I have to save them because nobody saved me." And I was the only one that would do it because I obviously told my mom and told my grandma they were protecting him. I think that they weren't protecting him to protect him. They were protecting him to protect my father, my grandfather, because had either of those ones had found out, I'm sure that, yeah, anyway, we don't need to go there. But, so
Right.
then I reported and we went, they took 2 police cruisers to the house where this person was, and I had to physically say, "That's him." They put him in the car behind me. They put my cousins in the cruiser with me. We went back to Camas because they were in Washougal. They separated the 3 of us, and they got all 3 of our stories, and they said our stories corroborated, and they booked him.
See, now here's the thing that
Joey Bell.
yeah, and that's amazing that you did that. Now, stories of incest are a different breed because it's not going to look like that for a person that comes from incest. Unfortunately, families of incest have a dynamic that they don't allow. And Carol, you can agree or not with this, but
Mhm.
as I see families of incest, there's not usually that many outside people that are very close to the
Mhm.
inside family unit. So you
Mhm.
have nobody. They make sure that everybody is taken. I mean, I just don't remember people staying the night with us. I don't remember, lots of
No.
activity in the house.
Mhm.
It's locked down like a true prison. And the only person who's got those keys is the abuser, which is usually the father. But Carol, you talk about, so for me, yeah, I wouldn't go to the police station. Like, I believe my dad had more power than they did because I was a child when he started. And so my belief system was broken, and my mother kind of instilled that by her lack of conduct. But
Participation.
yeah, can
Well, and
That too.
in my case, I had no memory of what was going on. I mean, nothing. I had
yeah,
no
see, and there's
idea.
that. Yeah,
And my father was a victim of my mother. So my mother was kind of the assigned bad person in the house, or she was the cause of whatever pain I had. I just assumed it was my mother. My father was this passive person who the community revered. If we went to church, we did anything, I'd hear how wonderful he was. Um, and I didn't know anything different. So it was just crazy making. I
so
mean,
yeah, this is interesting. Now, listening to this, I have to bring this up. I believed my father made me believe that my mother was this raging bitch, that she
yeah.
was the destroyer of the house. Now, if you go back to the story of Jezebel and Ahab was not the strongest in that relationship. Jezebel was, but Ahab was certainly a manipulator. I think that in these families, they're both villains, right? But we don't want to call them villains because you keep saying your dad's passive. I don't see a person who abuses a child, rapes a child at night multiple times over and over and over through the years. Would never use the word kind for a person
Oh
like that.
no,
And yet
no.
you did say, though, that didn't she say that, Joann, in the beginning? My father was passive and kind.
Oh
Oh, there,
yeah.
yes.
The
Yeah.
father that I knew, he was passive. He was like a very quiet.
Isn't that wild, though? I mean, when you
Yeah,
think
it's
about these,
crazy. And my
right,
mother was raging all over, and I didn't know what was going on. I mean, I had no
right.
idea, except I felt very unsafe. I knew I was going to be hurt. I had no idea how. And I was just desperately trying to make sense of this crazy situation. And
Exactly.
yeah, yeah.
No, it's true. And it is so confusing that a child's mind cannot comprehend it. And so ultimately we kind of believe what's being told to us because we don't have any other tools other than what they're telling us. But Joann talked about a very interesting thing when she and I had our chat together, our hour chat. And one of the things that she said that I have to say that it took me years to understand that it was the truth, but Joann said, I didn't really love my mom. My mom didn't really love me, and I didn't really love her. And, actually, I even wrote about that in my book, that I just really didn't like my mom much, and she didn't like me. But as a child, we really want to believe, and we really want their love, and we want to believe that that relationship was there. But Joann, do you remember talking about that?
Absolutely.
So, that's a hard honesty to talk about. It's not anger. It's not unforgiveness. It's kind of just the facts, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So, Joann, talk a
It's
little bit
really
about that.
sad. When my mom died, I felt the hugest lump of pity in my throat, but I didn't love her. I haven't missed her. I haven't loved her since I was about 11 or 12. And that's when the catalyst, when everything blew off the top and I became the enemy. I told the family secret, therefore it brought shame upon her, her name, her little image that she was trying to create. And I was prime enemy number one. And like I said,
that's amazing that a mother would do that, as we're all mothers, you can't imagine.
Yeah, I lived in the home until I was, I think, 17, and I married. And I was pretty much the maid, the cook, the butler, the housekeeper. I kept the house warm while Dad was at work. It was my job to keep the furnace running, to keep Mother the Queen, warm. And it's just, it's the old cliche. It is what it is, and it just made me so strong. And I'm, like, I look at my journey as, again, it is what it is. And, I have gained so many skills, so many talents, so many abilities, and grown. And us strong women, we do things like this. We write books so that we can help people go through what we went through. And, sad. I mean, it's really sad. I wish that we had the ability to understand our mothers, our fathers, these people. But we're not like that. And that's what sets us apart. I was also thinking earlier when you were talking about your dad, Carol, that we see these people sometimes as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Yes.
And how they shift throughout the story, and my dad, like I said, my dad was mentally and emotionally and verbally abusive, and occasionally physically, but not sexually. And so for me, there's a huge line there, between that. And but abuse is abuse. And I just think, though, that when we're talking about the different types, like, I would rather have somebody beat the smithereens out of me, than hurt me emotionally, utilizing my heart, my mind, and my body. Whereas with the physical beating, you'll have bruises and you'll have soreness, and that's going to go away. But the other types of abuse that we have suffered leave wounds that you can't see. They leave, I mean, just, we are broken internally. And yet people can't see that.
It's so true. Carol, did you talk to your mom? I don't know if your mom has passed or is she still living?
My mother died before I ever remembered of breast cancer.
Okay.
Yeah.
So she died early.
Yeah. So she never knew this. And so, I'm frequently asked, one of the first things I'm asked is, did your mother know? And I always find that's kind of interesting. But first of all, I'll never know if she knew. But she had a sense my father was having an affair. She would accuse him of having an affair, which maybe he was, I don't know. But I think that he was having it with me. And I think, that was how he got back at my mother. And I think she had a sense of that. But certainly never spoken, never discussed.
How do you think she would have handled that if you came to her and said, "Mom, I have got to tell you that Dad raped me from the time I was little until the time I left. What do you think she would have said to you?
I think she would have screamed and yelled at him and then continued on. I think women tend to be financially very dependent on men. And that would have been one thing. And, that's really hard for me because you want to think your mother would stand up for you and leave him and all of that. But nobody in my family's done that. Nobody has stood up.
See, and think about, right, Carol, think about what you just said. Wouldn't it, you guys? Wouldn't you agree that what we would hope we would think a mother would do is run to that child and hug them and say, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that was not your reaction. She'd yell at my dad. And so it's again the relationship between them that matter the most. It's weird how that happens. Even Joanne, you said, well, they protected the men. I mean, think about, that's another theme, right?
Yep.
And so
patriarchal society.
yes. I mean,
Yeah.
people don't realize how strongly those were in place. And really, the truth is, I mean, in Italy, if you go there to this day, they haven't changed hardly anything. When you go into the home of my family, the women stay in the kitchen while the men have espresso by the fire. And that's today. So we think that we've done all this changing, but have we? But another thing that I want to talk about is, Joanne, you used the word, and I had it written on my notes, image. They were so addicted to image that it's almost like it didn't matter what happened in the background. Don't bring it in the forefront. Does that, Carol, why don't you go ahead and start with the image of, I know your father was a physician, you had a beautiful house, like talk about the image and how much that mattered in your home.
I think that was everything. I call it curb appeal. The family.
I love it.
Family had real curb appeal. And I can remember the neighbors telling me they just wish they grew up in my home, and because it looked good, and I think that is the bottom line with my mother. I think she would never have given up her image or place in society. I don't think she would have done it. She just,
and that was more important than her
important.
protecting her daughter from being raped
right.
all the time.
And
I mean, when you think about that and say it, the reason why I like to say it like that is because when you really say it like that, wow.
Yeah. And, we were all coming up in the 50s, 60s.
Right.
And, it was a very different world. And I wrote about that. My mother was, a very bright woman. I don't think she had any interest in having 4 children. The babies just kept coming. And this was not a role she wanted. And, and I think a lot of these women were stuck in roles they didn't want. They were, sedating. So many of these women were on Valium, and I can remember the neighbors' moms, there was not this sense of women saying what they need to say or even be able to support themselves. That was a much bigger issue than any of us really realized.
And yet, well, and yet though, we can add, they certainly had a voice in our homes. All of our mothers could scream and yell and control the house and be violent, right? Joanne, would you agree with that? So while they never did it out here, they certainly did it in the home. My mother was she was a rageaholic all the time. But when the phone rang, she'd say, hello, after she just screamed at the entire household. Yeah. And so they did have a voice when they chose to use it, right?
Right. Behind closed doors.
Behind closed doors.
Right.
It's interesting that both of your mothers are similar, whereas my father was the screamer. My father was the yelling, throwing massive fits. And my mother was, I don't know how to describe her. My mother would always say things like, you guys are going to put me in the mental house. You guys are going to make me go to the crazy house. You guys are going to so we were doing all these things. And then she would be like, she would be shaking her hands and shaking her head, and tears would be streaming down her face. And, so it was always, of course, our faults that she was going to go crazy, And at one point in time, as an early teen, in my mind, I was like, okay, well, what's keeping you, woman, because I was tired of it. I'm like, okay, so just go crazy and get out of our hair. But she, yeah. And then I wanted to go back and explain. So the earlier molestation came about because my mom had, to go and have bowling nights with my dad. So they would go out to the bowling alley and my dad played bowling. And so my mother, of course, had to be there, the reigning queen, for my dad to support my dad. And so she would hire anyone to babysit, just anyone. And I would say, oh no, not so-and-so. Oh no, not so-and-so. Mom, please don't. And, I would cry and be distressed and, oh, stop it. Just, it's going to be fine. And then when, say, one of their sisters came to watch us, I'm like, oh, thank you that so-and-so's coming, none of that got picked up on or,
See, and that's something that my girl, I have 2 daughters now that each have children. And I have to tell you, they'll stop me sometimes and say, Mom, I don't do that with my kids. They're anything they're feeling is valid, and I'm going to find out why. And you know what? I have been proven wrong time and time again, because while that breaks my heart, I didn't know how to do that with them. They have done it with their children. And see those, because then the messages carry on in us. We're not important. You're not important. It's really hard to break those generational things, which is really why I want to talk about this. These are difficult subjects. And I was not the best mom. I thought I was being a good mom. I knew how to cook good. I did their hair. I read them books. But I didn't do the most important things that were to keep them safe from their father, because I was living out the very life that I'd been brought into. And those are hard things. So the reason I want to talk about these things is just like what you brought up, is then that's how I was with my kids. When their needs came up, guess what I did? Well, you need to be quiet. That's no big deal. Like, I didn't know how to even validate their needs because I didn't know how to validate my own. Carol, does that make any sense with you?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I hear from both of you, to get out of your really dysfunctional, horrible homes, you got married and started having children. And you were so young, you hadn't had the maturity to look at what happened. You were just right, and you see that all the time. And I do totally understand that. I certainly, I didn't have kids till I was 30. And, I look back too, and I wish I'd been a lot more nurturing. And, there are a lot of things I wished I'd done. But like you say, you did the best you could. And, a mother cannot be a nurturing person unless they have a lot of mental health going on and that they're in a really good place. And none of our mothers were. And the other thing I wanted to say was, I hear this power dynamic in all these homes where it was not even. These were not mature, mature people on their own. Like I like to say, 2 strong trees with a common root system. They were not, there was a huge imbalance of power. And that seems to be also what allows sexual abuse to go on. It's just like another way of looking at that.
Yeah, I like that very much. One of the things I wanted to ask about, and I'm going to use this word, nobody likes this word, people don't like this word at all, but there's this word called jealousy. Now, I'm not talking about jealousy in a sexual way, but I felt my mother actually would say things to me like, you were the child I wanted the least. I didn't stay home with you very much because I was the 4th of 4 children and that sort of thing. And I felt like she was jealous of my time with my father that he spent with me, which at a great cost to me, obviously. But I also just felt like she was like, I heard somebody else say, she wanted all of her time to herself. She didn't want me there. And so I don't know, but I always did feel this weird jealousy from my mother. And I can't, it's still hard for me to articulate, even at 60, what that really means. And that's why I want to bring it up, because it's not that I'm really good at talking about it, but I always felt it. Can any of you talk about that? Joann, go ahead. Good. Go ahead and
when
yeah.
I was 11, I drew a caricature of a woman that I thought was extremely beautiful, which was Farrah Fawcett Majors. And I took it up to my mom. My mom was a woman because she passed away, but my mom was a woman that could pick up any craft and do it as if she'd been doing it for 25 years. She was very talented. And so I took this caricature, to my mom, and she critiqued the crap out of it. And I threw my pencils away and I threw my paper away and I never drew again. The sad thing about that is okay, now looking back, I remember that drawing as if I drew it yesterday. You all know Beavis and Butthead. Well, honestly, it looked like one of those characters.
I'm not critiquing,
but I was only 11.
Yeah.
Only 11. But
so
I believe, and I have heard this so many times. Huh?
I said you had talent that.
Well, I believe that so many.
Yep.
I think so. I do. Many people have told me that my mom realized that I had abilities and that threatened her. And so I was like, wow, because I thought my mom was one of the most phenomenal artists, talented people. And it was so sad because she never believed in herself.
Mm-hmm.
It was so sad. I mean, I have paintings all over, that she painted, but she never believed in herself.
Yeah.
So I was like, wow.
Yeah, my mother was a writer and she hid it from us. She would submit articles and I guess she was embarrassed that they didn't get picked up or something. But yeah, she never got to, realize her talents and that kind of thing. It was because they were so busy raising, all these kids. So
Carol, did you feel a jealousy with your mom, Carol?
That's really interesting you say that. Yeah, yeah, I think it was like this accusing him of affairs and like there was somebody else that was getting the positive emotion from him. And he used to like sit at dinner table and just rub my arm and I always thought, it was nice. Now it gives me the creeps.
I used to call that Chinese torture. My father would do that to me too. He would just rub, like we'd be watching TV and he'd find a spot and just rub me. I hated it even as a child. I just wanted to go away from him because they, you know what I mean? And then when I grew and didn't live in his house anymore, he'd still hold me in, really awkward ways. And I wonder too if when it's this incestuous thing, but even Joann felt it too. And I think it was very wise of Joann that you said it was an insecurity in them, because a secure person, again, we're talking about people that are broken, right? You don't feel jealous when you feel good about yourself. And it has nothing to do with how you look or any of those things. It really is an internal worth piece. But I do think it's very interesting. Where I was going with that is when it's your father now, we're confused and complicated. Like, is my mom going to be jealous because my father's coming in here having sex with me, treating me like a mistress? And even when we don't understand it, it's bizarre that you do feel those complicated emotions when because of course you grow, right? Like mine started when I was 3, because I turned 4 and then we moved out of that house. And he raped me before I left and actually got married. You guys, it was horrible. But we live with this trauma stuff, so we don't carry that with us. You know what I mean? I think back and I think I can't actually find the timeline. When was the last time he raped me? But I was going to go sleep with my husband not very soon after that. Like, it was that horrific, but he didn't remember it anymore, right? But
I had no idea. I had no idea. People think
I understand that.
You had an inkling. I had nothing. And I don't know. And I think they had a bias too that, something like that happens in bad families. That's
right.
That kind of thing happens in, like, I don't know. you know,
So
like
I blog all the
the
time, right, Carol? And one of the things, I remember this one entry that I wrote about, whose story are you telling? Because what
Mhm.
happens is, the reason why we don't have our story is because we start telling their story. And then we come into life and we just tell the story that they've always told us to tell. And our
Yeah.
mind is gone and who we are is gone. And one of the things that God has done the best for me is say, you see you, Jody. I need you to find you.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
that's huge, because we're always telling somebody else's story. We don't know who we
Yeah.
are.
Yeah. That's right. You have to come back to yourself.
Yes.
And you're really, you know, I've seen with myself, until I'm nurturing to myself, which has really been just the
Mm-hmm.
last couple of years. Um, is I guess I never really thought about it until I can be nurturing to me. It's a lot harder to be nurturing to your children, or to be a
Mm-hmm.
mother that way, and to others around you. So you have to have that personal connection, that personal growth. I know for me, I very split off from my body, very,
Mm-hmm.
uh, you know, hating my body. I have a lot of that. And I've suffered with an eating disorder, all my adult life. Um, and I think it's, yeah, that's reconnecting to your soul, to yourself, to loving
Mm-hmm.
yourself through all the mistakes we make all day. And
But see, that when you say I'm disconnected from my body, my God, that's how we made it, you guys. If we would have
yes,
stayed
that was
connected to our
divine.
bodies when all of that happened, and then you grow up and they're
Absolutely.
like, that's dysfunctional, that's dissociation, and I'm
Yeah,
like, that's survival. What do you mean everything I'm
it's
doing is wrong?
survival.
Right?
Right. And
It's
somebody said to me,
interesting that
go ahead.
you both disassociated, because I did not. I
Mm,
don't. Um, I did not disassociate. So for me, truth is how I made it.
really?
I at a very early age said that, because you're feeling this way about me doesn't mean that I do. I
Mhm.
remember feeling that when my dad would be going off about, oh, that's what happens when you think for yourself, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, but that doesn't ring true in here or
Mhm.
here for me. And so it was like, I had a voice. Well, and my dad did say, if you don't share my opinion, then you don't have one. If you don't share my feelings, then you don't have them. So inside, I'm like, yes, I do. Yes, I do. That little me inside was angry and kept saying, this isn't true. This
Yeah.
isn't true. So I kept a huge wall out there of your feelings and then my feelings. And I journaled, I diaried, I wrote in my diary all the time, today was a good day or today was a bad day or so and so did and said and whatever, and then how I felt about it. Because it's kind of like, those friends of ours that are like, oh, well, if you don't like the San Francisco 49ers, we can't be friends. Well, no, you can like whoever you like, and I can like whoever I like. I personally don't care about sports. So there you go, but like, I learned that at a very early age. I'll never forget, in I think sixth grade, somebody came up to me, "Oh, you like so and so? We can't be friends." And I said, "Well, that's really sad because I can see that there's things about her that you might not like, but I like her and I like you." And she was like, "Okay, we'll choose." And I said, "Okay, bye." And I went to that other friend because I don't play that kind of game. For me, it was always like I a lot when we went to, like, I don't remember, I think it was 6th or 7th grade, we went to see Chief Laluska up in Ridgefield. There's that Indian thing. I don't know if you went there, Jody,
I
or not,
did. I
or maybe you
remember
weren't
Chief
in school at
Laluska.
that time. Anyway, yeah, and I was so infatuated with him, but the one thing that he said that stuck in my mind the most is their homes, their cabins. So when they add a new family member, they add an addition onto it and make it bigger. So they end up with these big old long buildings, their homes. And that's kind of what my memory is like to me. So some people build walls. and they close things off behind those walls. Okay, I don't want to remember this. So here's a wall. Here's, this one's brick because it's really, really bad. Or they close it behind a door. For me, my memory is literally from the minute I remember to today, to now, right now. It's there's no walls, there's no doors. I can see it. Now, the one thing that has not remained intact is dates. I had brain surgery when I was 30, and so that affected that part of my. I can tell you that I was 5 when the abuse started. I can tell you that I was 11 when I reported, 12 when I went to the police. I can tell you that we moved into the Camus house at 11, and that's where those two stopped. The molestation of those two stopped, and the molestation of this and this and this started. And, I can tell you those things, but it's only because of my memory of where we moved, where we lived. But I can't tell you it was July 1964. Okay. I can't tell you things like that. But, and I think sometimes people think because I can't give a date to it that my feelings aren't valid. You can say whatever you want to say. My truth stands. You don't have to like it. That's not my problem.
Well, right. And
I know what happened to me.
Right. And I don't think we're going to remember dates. And Carol, you can certainly talk about this, but I can tell you that in a home of incest, when you have no reprieve from your oppressor, I had nothing but fear in my life. I remember one time trying to go to a friend's house. I couldn't even stay there because I was terrified of everything. And when I got married, I was terrified of everything at 17. I was terrified of everything, Joann. So for me, I didn't journal. I didn't have anything except trying to breathe and get through that day. I just existed and did what I was told next, because that was the only thing left in my being. I was damn near gone. I always said the only thing I had left was a heartbeat and a smile, because I did the look good, because that's what I was demanded to do. So Carol, go ahead and talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, what ultimately happens is we have no childhood, and when we're supposed to be growing up and changing, I always felt like I never had enough lessons. I mean, I just never did. It was that, mentally, where you're just your interests and what you want to be and all those things, I was on survival mode.
I think that's true. You guys, believe it or not, we are at time. I'm so surprised that we're at time. Thank you so much for being here today. I really think I want to do this with you guys more, because it's really cool to have these themes that come up and then to kind of come together and talk about it. And I like that we have these different things. While Carol and I came from homes of incest, Joann, yours was different. It was all of these outsiders that abused you. And I think that in your case, that built a different strength. I think all of us come at some point in our lives, hopefully, with strength. That's one of the things that we're trying to do here. But that's why I love the perspectives that are here. So I kind of anticipate doing this with you guys more. I really like it. And thank you so much for being here. We're going to go ahead and close for tonight. If you like what we're doing, please subscribe and follow to support our work. And we'll see you next time on Let's Talk About It.
Thank you so